I really have to tell you how moved I have been by talking to each of you, by really my family sitting here, my partner of 32, 33 something years, and Bob and Tony, Dwight and Ruth, Jim Matulski, people of my heart. We really do become family for each other in such powerful ways, and I am also feeling so moved by the ministries represented here. Roberto, Nancy, Alan, people who have powerful ministries. I really thank you. I have to tell you that I came to MCC Boston in 1972. I had just figured out that I was gay. I was terrified. I didn't know any other gay people except the woman I fell in love with. So I thought, I'm not gay, I'm just in love with this woman. But I was terrified because I knew, of course, I was a lesbian. And I remember in 1972 in December coming to MCC Boston, and within, I would say, 20 minutes, I knew everything was going to be all right. I knew. And then I heard Nancy Wilson preach, and I really knew everything was going to be all right. And MCC Boston, in those few minutes, changed my life forever. It saved my life. And, the number of people here do not represent at all the thousands and thousands of people who I know have come through this church and had their lives saved and changed forever. This happened all the time in MCC New York. We would see people you would know, this is what's happening to them. Their lives are coming together. Their hearts are being healed. They know that God loves them, just like I felt here in 1972. And then we would never see them again. But we didn't need to see them again because their lives had been healed in a fundamental way, and in that way that can happen when you're an LGBTQ person and you're with other LGBTQ people of faith. And so it is with great humility and great gratitude that I come back here tonight and congratulate you most sincerely on your anniversary, and thank you most sincerely for the work that all of you and all the people in MCC Boston have done all these years. And so what I wanted to do, I thought, well, what can I bring, What can I bring back after 45 years? And I just had to, so we've all been reading the newspaper, we've all been hearing the news, and what I wanted to bring was that these two scriptures that keep coming back to me as I hear the news, as I get worried about the people in the hurricane. I'm so glad Alan mentioned them. And, as we know, it's the poorest people who are the most damaged by these storms. And I'm so glad that you said that, Alan. And so all this stuff, I don't need to tell you what's going on in the world, One of the things that helps me the most is this scripture from Ephesians: we do not contend against flesh and blood. This is not about impeaching someone. This is not about any political party. This is not even about capitalism. This is not about, anything like that you can name. This is about something far older, far deeper, and far larger. And in a way, I find that so hopeful. I find that so hopeful because there's no us and them here. There's no enemy here, really. We are not contending against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, the powers, the rulers of this present darkness, and against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. In other words, the power of evil. So what is evil? I really like the way Buddhists talk about evil. Evil is greed, hatred, and delusion. I like that. I can get my mind around that. And what I know about that is that I too participate in greed, hatred, and delusion. And every time I manage to chip away a little bit at my own greed, at my own hatred or aversion, every time I manage to chip a little bit away from my own delusion, even though it's uncomfortable, I know that I'm helping to give birth to love in the world. I'm helping to overcome evil in the world. It's like Mother Teresa said, we do not do great things, we do small things with great love. So I know I don't have to every day come up with something really wonderful to, change the world. I know that if I just keep working on my own ability to channel love, that is what God requires of me. And then, how do we contend against flesh and blood? Well, Jesus, Paul says, okay, the whole armor of God, truth, righteousness, peace, faith, salvation, the sword of the Spirit. That sounds good, doesn't it? But it's not very specific. And we need right now to be very specific because we're contending against huge hosts of wickedness, and when we read the paper, we get really overwhelmed. I do. I know everyone does. So I wanted to talk about Walter Wink and his interpretation of these three gospel readings, because he's a New Testament scholar who just opened these scriptures for me in a way that made me understand that this was very radical, and it means the opposite of what we have always heard that it means. So bear with me if you heard this before, but even if you had, it bears repeating. So it needs the historical context. So the Palestinians, the people that Jesus was preaching to, they were an occupied people. They were occupied by a particularly brutal, overwhelming, militaristic, cruel group of people, the Romans. And so the people that he was talking to were a terrorized people. They would have remembered that only 20 years ago, the Romans crucified 2,000 Galileans right near them because the people in Galilee had tried to have an insurrection. So 2,000 people were crucified. Crucifixion, like lynching in our country, was a particular way to humiliate people, a particular way to torture them, a particular way to kill the people that the Romans, or in our case the white people, wanted to suppress. Crucifixion was a Roman form of public service announcement. It was not so much aimed toward killing the people that they were crucifying, but sending a message to everybody else. Don't do this. Don't act up. Look what could happen to you. So these people that Jesus is talking to, they really have two choices, right? Fight or flight. That's what we're hardwired for. When we're terrorized, when bad things happen to us, our adrenaline comes up and we want to fight, or we want to run away. Well, these people, they learned they couldn't fight. They learned that. And so I think what Jesus was really fighting against in these scriptures, trying to get people to understand you can't submit either. You really can't submit, because the powers of evil that make you so submissive it's not okay. You have to resist this Roman occupation. That's really what he was saying, and let me tell you why. Because his first thing was, when you are struck on the right cheek, turn to your enemy the left cheek as well. So you have to know the background of this. So in those days, you couldn't use your left hand even to gesture. I would be fined for this, because you're only supposed to use your left hand to clean yourself after you defecate. So it's a right-handed culture. So if someone is striking you on your right cheek, think about it. This is my right hand. I'm striking you on your right cheek. So what you're going to do is your right cheek is going to go like this, right? Well, this is my right cheek. So I'm being backhanded. What you did, the way that you struck people who were inferior to you, slaves backhanded masters, husbands backhanded wives, Romans backhanded the Palestinians. So, okay, I've just been backhanded. So what do I do? Instead of, cowering, I do this. What am I doing? I'm demanding that the person who backhanded me treats me as an equal. Because if they're going to hit my left cheek, they're going to have to do it with their fist. And that's what you do to appear to an equal. All of this was in the laws. You know, you could be fined, for example, 4 units of money for hitting a peer with your right hand, but 400 for hitting a peer with your left hand. So it's all very equal. And the people that heard him would have known that. They would have known, oh my goodness, he's telling us to stand up to the Romans. The slaves would have thought, oh my God, he's telling us to stand up to the masters. The women would have said, oh my God, when my husband backhands me, he's telling me to put it right back to him and demand that I be treated as an equal. This was very, very radical. And it gets even more interesting, because then he said, if anyone would sue you in a courtroom, think about a courtroom, and take your cloak, give that give them your cloak as well. So, remember, they didn't have Hanes underwear in those days. They really didn't. They had the poorest of the poor who were being sued only had 2 garments. They were being sued for their outer garment, okay? Now in Deuteronomy, it said that if you were sued for your outer garment, the person would have to give back your outer garment every night because you had nothing else to sleep in. You're a very poor person, you're being sued for your outer garment, the one you sleep in. You only own 2 things. The other thing you own is basically your underwear. It's like probably not like underpants, but it's underwear. It's the only thing you have to wear. And he said, if anyone sues you for that outer garment, take off the inner garment as well. So this is the scene. You're in the courtroom and you strip naked before the person who has sued you. And what you are doing is you're shaming the person who is suing you. It's an obscene, like much of what we're seeing coming down, you know, in our government. It's an obscene thing that someone would sue you for the only garment that you have. And so what you're doing is you're shaming the person who's doing that, because in that system, it was the person who beheld nakedness. In South Africa, once there was a shanty town that white people were trying to destroy. Walter Wink tells the story. And so they kept trying to destroy it, and people managed to hold on to it, except one day when these young soldiers, white soldiers, came with bulldozers. And they gave, most people were at work, but there were a few older women there, and they gave the women 5 minutes. They said, get your things in 5 minutes, and then we're going to bulldoze the village. So what these women did, instead of going into their house to get their stuff, they came right up to the bulldozer and removed all of their clothes. So these young white men were in the bulldozer, naked women. What do you think they did? What do you think they did? What? Some of you know the answer. What did they do? They left. They left. They were so embarrassed that they just left. And so they couldn't destroy the shantytown. The women had turned the tables on these soldiers exactly in the way that Jesus recommended. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles. So in those days, the occupying force was allowed to make the Palestinians, the occupied people, go a mile. There were very heavy packs, 65 to 85 pounds, Walter Wink tells us, okay? So someone is making you carry a pack for an entire mile. It's really heavy. At the end of the mile, you want to give it back, but instead, you just keep carrying it. But guess what? The occupying soldiers are going to be subject to a fine if they don't give up, if they don't take back the pack after a mile. So what this is doing once again is it is throwing the oppressor off balance. Imagine the Roman soldier is having to sort of beg the Jewish person, like, please give me my pack back. So he switched the power relationships completely. So people refusing to not be seen as fully human, people refusing to be in the role of the oppressed, knocking the oppressor off balance, taking the initiative. So a little bridge from this crucifixion history and this occupation history to our history. So, you know, there's a great connection between the cross and the lynching tree. In our country, 5,000 black people were lynched between 1840 and 1920. And we have to look at this history. We have to look at the fact that sometimes these were announced ahead of time in the newspaper, and white people came and we brought our children, and 10 to 20,000 people would be there, and there would be souvenir postcards. It's so painful to know this history, and yet it is so liberating, because what we understand is that human beings are capable of terrible things, and that this is within us and within all of our systems. But when we look full in the face at this, and we look full in the face at what Jesus said to do in the same situation, in a very similar situation, then there's a great deal of hope. Because in addition to fight or flight, there's a third way, and it's very radical, and it takes the initiative. And the thing that I want to say to us as an LGBTQ Christian community at this perilous time in our history, when we must again take the initiative, when we must again shame the oppressor, when we must again expose the obscenity of much of what is going on in the name of law and order, for example. We have a proud history of LGBTQ people and Christians of doing just that, of very witty, very beautiful, very creative activism. I want to just give one example of something that was done in the civil rights movement. You know, Emmett Till was lynched. He was 14 years old. It was 1955. And what his mother did was, rather than just have him be buried after his body was sent to Chicago, was she insisted that his body be viewed. And 6,000 people filed by in Chicago and saw his body. And people saw pictures of his body. Millions of people saw pictures of his body. And this is what sparked the civil rights movement. This is exactly what Jesus was saying to do. We can't do much about some of these structures of violence. Something has happened already among us. But what she said in her biography was she just heard a voice, and she knew this was the right thing to do. Much like Martin Luther King knew in his heart what the right thing to do was, even though he was walking into so much danger. That is what we are called to do as people of faith, is keep listening. Keep listening. Because Mrs. Till doing that, Mamie Till Bradley doing that, changed history. It was such a brave thing to do. It was such a unusual thing to do. And yet this is what sparked the civil rights movement. This is what exposed the obscenity of the system. On a bad day, I think about that. I think about how the worst thing in the world had happened to her. And yet she found a way to change history with her own grief. I think about also on a bad day how AIDS activists put a condom on Jesse Helms' house. And that is especially meaningful to me now that I live in North Carolina. And I try to think about what would it be like to harass Senator Tom Tillis in exactly that same way. And I'm not going to rest until I figure out a way. So, you know, these are the people that we come from. These are our ancestors. These are the people who are the giants on whose shoulders we walk on. And we can draw that strength. The strength from Emmett Till's mother, the strength from those AIDS activists who are long gone but who showed us what it's like to be creative, what it's like to have joy in the midst of demonstrating, you know. So every time we bring beauty into the world, every time we fight for our lives or the lives of those we love, every time we love ourselves with a fierce love, every time we fight for all of our brothers and sisters everywhere in the world, not to mention the creatures, not to mention the earth. Every time we just ask God, tell me how to serve love today, we are part of that radical gospel of resistance. Thank you.